Good evening and welcome to Prime News. I'd like to welcome back my guest host, Erin Elmore.
Great to be here, Jen. The D.C. swamp monsters are apparently afraid of truck drivers because they're calling out the National Guard, and the CDC admits to withholding its own data on vaccines. But first, what's tonight's Prime News, Jen?
Well, Joe Biden responds to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finally, Biden speaking briefly today to acknowledge Russia's troop movement in eastern Ukraine as an invasion and announcing the first round of sanctions against Russian banks, with more coming in the days ahead. Are getting it right.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is leading the charge against Russia by promptly slamming the Kremlin with painful sanctions. Newsmax London correspondent Ollie Barrett has more. Ollie?
Jen and Erin, the government of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been attempting to show leadership when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. The UK for some time has been providing military training to Ukrainian forces. The UK government has very recently been sending in defensive weapons to the country in the face of perceived aggression from Moscow. Jen and Erin.
Ollie Barrett from London, thank you so much.
Joining us now to discuss is former Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs and former Undersecretary for Defense for Personnel Readiness, Robert Wilkie. Robert, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So as someone who served in the Trump administration, I'm really curious to get your thoughts on this. Former President Trump, he made some comments in an interview today regarding Putin recognizing Ukraine's breakaway regions as independent. There seems to be a lot of reaction over those comments made by a former president, more so than what we're seeing from Biden's big speech today, where he finally announced sanctions. This all happening as Putin eats Biden's lunch. What do you make of it?
Well, let's look at the history. Under Obama, Biden, Putin invaded Ukraine. Under Biden-Harris, Putin invaded Ukraine. Under Trump-Pence, Putin was a choir boy.
Secretary Wilkie, do you think that Biden's sanctions will deter Putin in any way? I mean, former Obama Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes says it won't make much of a difference. Listen to this.
Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to care.
So why did Biden wait so long to implement these sanctions?
Well, this is a 50-year history with Joe Biden. As my former boss, Bob Gates, has said, this man has been wrong about every major national security issue going all the way back to Vietnam, disasters that it has wrought across the globe.
1 minute left, but we know that tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Soviet Union. That's Putin's goal, is to see the empire reunited. So what's Biden's goal here, and how can he achieve it? So far, all we've seen are words and sanctions.
Right. I mean, if Biden really wanted to do something and make sanctions work, he would go after two elements. He would go after Russia's oil and mineral industries. The other thing that he would do is really get to the Putin inner circle by drying up international finance.
Prime Minister is the latest person to weigh in on Putin's movements into Ukraine.
But Justin Trudeau is dealing with his own human rights crisis, and now Americans are weighing in and taking action. That's next. It's clear Canadians aren't happy with how their prime minister is handling the trucker convoy, especially after the horrific violence we saw over the weekend.
And now a new poll is showing Americans are just as outraged. The poll from the Trafalgar Group and the Convention of States says more than half of Americans surveyed disapprove of Justin Trudeau's actions. Sadly, almost 10% didn't even know what's going on up north. And it gets even more baffling when you break it down by political party.
Democrats come December. Sorry, November.
Right, and Mark, the interesting... November
can't come soon enough, though, to be honest,
soon
right?
enough.
It could be April for us, as far as I'm concerned.
So the interesting thing about these convoys is it isn't really a vaccinated versus unvaccinated issue. It's just about freedom, medical freedom. Did your poll get any insight into whether anyone who participated was vaccinated?
No, the poll did not, but I've seen the numbers up in Canada. Approximately 80% plus of the truckers were already vaccinated. I think the numbers would hold relatively true for the United States. The issue is not about vaccines versus not vaccines. It literally is about freedom, and it's about more than medical freedom. It's about mandates generally, the imposition by the government on the liberties of freedom-loving Americans. And frankly, what we've seen in Canada, I think it's minor compared to what we might see in the United States. And it's not going to fare well come the November elections.
Mark, it's never right to call someone a racist or a Nazi, and thank you for breaking down all this information. Really valuable. We appreciate it. U.S. Capitol Police and the D.C. Emergency Management Agency have all asked for assistance. The Pentagon says it hasn't approved the request yet, but notified troops of a potential activation tomorrow through March 7th. This would provide troops at key traffic arteries in and outside of the city. This comes at a time where security is already heightened for Biden's first State of the Union address next week. Temporary fencing is already up by the Capitol, but police have been tight-lipped on what other precautions they plan on taking.
Joining us now to discuss is former Homeland Security Department advisor and former Secret Service agent Charles Marino. Charles, thanks for being with us.
Well, we're going to see an expanded security presence around the State of the Union. You know, for every State of the Union, the Department of Homeland Security designates it an NSSE event, a National Special Security event.
Right, so this approval will be one of the first uses of a new law put in place post the Capitol riots. And it would make it easier to request emergency assistance from the National Guard. Do you think that's weighing over the DOD's head as they consider this decision?
You know, while they've created the new mechanisms for both the city government of D.C. and the Capitol Police, that if there's going to be any trouble, you're going to see it on 95, 495, the Washington, D.C. Beltway.
While most of D.C. braces for protests, the CDC is protesting, get this, science.
A bombshell report shows just how little the government is telling you about its own research on the COVID vaccine. We reveal the full picture with Dr. Jonathan Baugh coming up next. When it comes to COVID and factual information, we've all been living in the land of Oz, and the CDC is the wizard pulling the strings.
Yeah, no kidding, Erin. After 2 years of making excuses for the CDC, even the New York Times is starting to peek behind the curtain. In their bombshell article, the CDC isn't publishing large portions of the COVID data it collects.
And also doesn't even follow their pattern that they've given before. We've had data released early, and we've had data that's been released late, and we've had data that's been conflicting all along the way. And so if we look at this data, it really is hard to be able to pull together for those of us who don't have the inside scoop. And one of the biggest things I've complained about from the very beginning is the politicization of the identification, treatment of COVID-19.
Unfortunately, Dr. Baugh, it does seem like COVID has completely been politicized. But going back to some of the CDC data, we know that vaccines effectiveness, I hate to say it, wanes rapidly after 2 doses, and little is known about the booster's impact. So why the continued push for mass vaccinations and mandates?
Yeah, Erin, that's a great question that is hard to really have a great answer for. And one of the reasons why is because if we're looking at how do we treat individuals and how do we prevent disease and how do we prevent worse outcomes, then it's a much more complex answer than vaccine, which has been the mantra after we developed the vaccine. And I believe that it should be one of the tools in the tool belt, but there's so many other things and things that are considered alternative medicine right now.
Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Baugh. You broke everything down for us so well tonight and gave us information that we're not getting from the mainstream media. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
And Biden will mention the latest CDC controversy during his first State of the Union next week.
No chance at all, but he will likely mention how amazing his response has been to the COVID crisis, clearly in a state of denial. Our special series continues with the man who oversaw Trump's highly successful Operation Warp Speed next.
1 week from tonight, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds will deliver the GOP's rebuttal to President Biden's first State of the Union.
That's right. I have a feeling the governor's speech will be much more coherent than Sleepy Joe's. And, she probably won't do that weird whispery thing either. But the pressure is on for Biden to deliver a home run speech with the midterms later this year. So in order to make his administration look competent, we expect Biden to lie, give misleading stats.
Maximum control over all of our lives.
Well, Brian, you helped Trump's Operation Warp Speed, and you saw just how hard the president worked to keep our schools open. But during his State of the Union, Biden will try to say that he did all of this, and the Democrats have kept our schools open, which is sort of true. But Biden has allowed masks to remain on our children's faces. I know it as a parent, and it drives me crazy. It's good to be back in school. But isn't it better for our children to breathe? We've seen speech impediments. We've seen delayed learning. We've seen CDC lower guidelines for young children. What do you think is the answer?
Well, he's definitely going to take credit for a lot of things that are undeserving of him. When he came in office, he pretended that the Trump administration had done no planning. He said there were no vaccines, in the cupboard, as it were. But some of the most disheartening stuff is, as we just talked about, at our schools. I mean, these young children who are statistically, we know this from Johns Hopkins now, statistically zero risk of dying from COVID are being forced to walk around harming millions of Americans across the country.
And how do you think Biden will address the unvaccinated in his speech? Remember, over the Christmas holiday, he promised us a deadly winter for the unvaccinated, which, spoiler alert, that didn't happen. Now they're putting the fencing back around the Capitol, anticipation of the trucker rally. Do you think Biden will once again use the stage to attack the unvaccinated?
Well, I think it's I can't let them go without at least observing the grotesque irony of him not wanting to continue the Trump fence and the Trump wall here at the southern border, but Nancy Pelosi wanting to put a wall around the Capitol. I think that's very interesting.
Well, the biased mainstream media is giving Joe Biden full credit for the coronavirus recovery by picking and choosing what they share.
It seems they have a habit of doing that, and Kyle Rittenhouse knows exactly how that feels firsthand. Now the vindicated teen has a new idea to hold liars in the press accountable.
Holding the media accountable, Kyle Rittenhouse has announced plans to sue news organizations and media personalities for their biased coverage against him.
Rittenhouse was ultimately found not guilty of fatally shooting 2 men and injuring another during the 2020 protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Many had already labeled the 18-year-old as guilty and a white supremacist before his trial had even started. But ultimately, a jury acquitted Rittenhouse on all charges, ruling that it was self-defense.
Rittenhouse has now announced a new initiative called the Media Accountability Project to help fundraise for other people so they can sue the liberal media for its reckless coverage. He told the Washington Examiner that in the long term, he wants to provide a platform for independent journalists who are committed to the truth. But for right now, his top priority is accountability.
Newsmax contributor and former legal counsel to President Trump, Jenna Ellis. Jenna, welcome.
Great to see you, Jen and Erin. Thanks.
Now, what is your reaction to this? I know it's very difficult for a public figure such as Kyle Rittenhouse to successfully sue the news media. We're seeing that play out with Sarah Palin and the New York Times. But do you think this type of fundraising group can really make a difference?
I think it can, and I think that it should. This type of lawsuit, and especially in the wake of Sarah Palin's lawsuit and even President Trump's lawsuits and others, trying to hold the media accountable for reckless disregard for the truth and out false statements. Project should be something that we all champion and support because media should be held accountable. We're all entitled to our opinions, but we need to get the facts straight first.
So, Jenna, you speak about accountability and justice. How do you think Rittenhouse's litigation is going to play out? Do you foresee large monetary damages, arguments before the Supreme Court, or maybe a big private settlement? Which way do you see this going?
Yeah, that remains to be seen, and I think it ultimately depends on how his lawyers want to proceed in that. But what I would love from whether it's the Rittenhouse case, the Sarah Palin case that certainly will be appealed, or any number of other public figures who have suffered these false and defamatory statements from the mainstream media, eventually getting to the Supreme Court, so that the New York Times versus Sullivan case, which is basically a case that says the freedom of the press, of course, is paramount, and we should obviously respect journalistic integrity, but there has to be a measure of accountability.
I have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Jenna Ellis, Esquire.
Thanks,
thank you so much. Sorry to cut you off there. Always
Thank
informative. Well, either way you slice it, Kyle Rittenhouse made the media go cuckoo during his trial.
And believe it or not, Jen Psaki actually agrees with Kyle Rittenhouse on this one. Well, sort of. Just wait until you hear what the Secretary of Spin had to say about some of media's reporters next.
Biden hasn't been taking questions from the press recently. Maybe he's still recovering from that 2-hour marathon news conference back in January, where he took a few too many questions. Rob Lowe asked Jen Psaki what she thought about it on his podcast. Take a listen.
I mean, I'm a pretty chill person. I think people who work with me would say, but I think when some of the questions started to be off in cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs land there, I was thinking, oh my, where are we going here with this?
Right. Well,
folks,
she told us all to relax
right.
and take a kickboxing lesson.
That's right. It's going to do it for us tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock Eastern. Rob Schmidt Tonight starts right now.